everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. We have just finished the 2024 presidential election for the United States. We have been going over this. We've been talking individually. We've been talking with each other. We've been talking with others, as I'm sure you have too. We like to focus on the legal sections of the various topics through the week. That's what our show is about. So what we're doing is we're putting together a series of these episodes that are going to discuss the presidency, presidential powers, and various other topics regarding the presidency. So stay tuned with us today. What we're going to talk about today is the recent election, the legalities of it, including the electoral process. We've talked a little bit about it before, but we're going to come back to it, how it works, and what to do in going forward with the formalities. The next ones we're going to do, stay tuned because we've got a few coming down the pike as to presidential pardons, the Department of Justice, and executive orders. So we're going to talk about that, as well as with the Department of Justice, we're going to talk about Trump's cases, where they stand, what to do with them, what the requirements are when he's president, and what the requirements to do and not to do are when he's a sitting president. So I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the CEO of The Law Unscripted, as well as the attorney for Tarani Law, LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. The Law Unscripted, we post two podcasts. We post this and the Law Unscripted podcast, and we're specifically designed to help people, especially law students, understand the law in a way that isn't fully taught in law school. So everything you didn't know about the law system, the law, the legal system, and what people didn't tell you. So we also have some bar prep and law exam prep material out there. Check that out, especially as we get closer to final exams. With me today, I have my colleague in the Law Unscripted and Tarani Law, Chelsea Rogers, who's also an attorney. Welcome.
Muted myself. I'm so sorry. Hi, Virginia. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here, especially as our swing voter in a swing state in Georgia. That must have been entertaining.
Oh, yeah. I still haven't cleared them out because I wanted to see the total number of texts that I received during the election cycle. It's over 107. And that is absolutely absurd, I would think. But,
and these are election related texts.
Election related texts. Yeah. And I still need to clear them out. And I just haven't yet because I was spending so long letting them accumulate so I could count them. I need to go back there and delete them, but it was over 107. Wow. So it's been an interesting couple months here in Georgia.
For the books. That's right. And Dr. Weil was in one of our southern states as well. You were in Tennessee, and you were
not a swing state.
Not a swing state, but a southern state. And you were joining us from Middle Tennessee State University. You were specifically the dean of the Honors College at the university and our expert in the Constitution, political science, the amending process, and constitutional law. Thanks for joining us again.
Pleasure to be here.
Okay.
And by the way, Chelsea didn't vote. She may have voted, but she didn't vote often enough.
Yeah,
at least in my judgment.
I forgot my 50 extra, mail-in ballots. Forgot to bring them. It's my fault, guys.
Part of it, you didn't have a U.S. Senate election this year, right?
Mm-mm.
And, I think the reason that Biden won in 20 was that there was such an election. And I believe it increased turnout, particularly probably among African Americans at the time.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to me. I don't know the numbers too well about what the turnout demographics were, but that would make sense.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a lot to take care of today, and we're going to go only on one topic. So this is a little bit of a change up for us. Normally our show, we do multiple topics and get it all done in one take. But in this one, what we're going to do moving forward, at least for a little while, is to break them into one chunk at a time. So for this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the election in the sense of the Electoral College. We're going to break that down a little bit more. And I believe, Dr. Weil, what was the other specific, other than just general election, that we want to discuss for this one?
Well, we need to talk a little bit about turnout, a little bit about the Electoral College. I want to talk a little bit about the degree to which the election is being described as a landslide.
Mm.
And it is an election in which it appears that the president's party will control probably both houses of Congress,
Right.
and arguably already has something of a majority on the Supreme Court. So technically, he'll control all three branches. But while the election is being described as a landslide, it really is not. I mean, there were many, I forget exactly what it is, but there were three states in which, a couple 10,000s of voters could have switched the election, and we would have had what I would have loved to have seen, which would be an election where the Democrat won the electoral vote without winning the popular vote. And the reason I'd like to see it is I don't think we'll ever have a change in the Electoral College as long as it always favors one side. And so far, 3 or 4 times where it's gone at recent 150 years or so, it's always gone in favor of a Republican candidate, which gives them no incentive to change it.
Interesting. And while you say in recent times, the funny thing is, our country is recent. The entirety of our country, when we look at all of the other places in the world, all of the other countries, we're looking at exactly how many years, Dr. Weil?
Well,
for
it's
us?
248 since the Declaration of Independence and 11 less for the Constitution. But now that being said, our country is arguably young by comparison to
Yes.
Great Britain or Germany or France or whatever. On the other hand, our Constitution is older than any. It's to my knowledge, the oldest Constitution for a nation that has survived, with amendments, but still intact after 230 years or so, a little bit more than that. So in that sense, our system is relatively old, even though our constitutional system, even though the country is relatively young.
And to that, we're going to add some wine. Happy hour for everybody. Hope you're listening and watching through happy hour on your morning commute. Dr. Weil has his normal water. Chelsea, what are you drinking today?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I keep accidentally muting myself. I don't know what's happening today. I Zoom updated on my computer, so I don't know if it's like a setting that I've now messed up because every time I go to talk, it's muted. But I'm back at it with my red boxed wine. Nobody's surprised by this. We're in our fall now, so I'm back with chillable red from Franzia. I love it.
Love it too. I have a nice red blend. So it's a Charles Woodson's Intercept, and it's a beautiful bottle. I don't know if you can tell. Honestly, we picked it up because it was so pretty on the bottle, which doesn't always work, I'm going to tell you. But in this case, it actually did. And we're like, oh, red blend, that could be all sorts of things. We may not like it. But we had a little dinner party last night, and we broke it out. And this is all that's left. So I'm drinking what's left, and you can tell how much we like it. But cheers, everybody. Here's to the Constitution and the electoral process. Okay. Dr. Weil, as our resident expert in all things Constitution and election, break down for us, we've talked about this before, but let's go back. How exactly does the electoral process work?
So basically, each state has a number of electors based on their total representation in the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. D.C. also, by constitutional amendment, has 3 electoral votes, which is equal to the smallest state. So there's a total of 538 electoral votes, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, 3 for the District of Columbia. And assuming, now there's a little caveat, which I believe we've discussed before, but assuming that all states' votes are certified, you would need a majority. You need to have 270 electoral votes to win. Right now, when you cast your ballot, you're actually voting for a set of electors that are pledged to vote for the candidates that you have selected. And by that vote at present, and I believe the final count is, let me see if I have it I know I have it here somewhere in my notes. Former President Trump, won both the Electoral College and the popular vote. And by the way, this is the first time that he's won both.
Both. Right.
In fact, it's the only time that he is actually in the 3 elections that he's actually won the popular vote. But in the first election, he won. He was able to win the Electoral College. Last election, he won neither the popular vote nor the electoral vote. This time, he won both. And somewhere I have it right. He won this year 312 to Harris's 226 electoral votes. You'll notice there, by the way,
that those numbers seem to invoke that landslide.
Okay. And typically that's what the Electoral College does. It typically magnifies the majority of the person who won the election. But if you look at the actual popular vote, and I don't guess that we need, 74,700,000 that million, whatever, versus 70,979,000 votes. And so it's that percentage looks like it's about 50.5 for President Trump and 48% for Kamala Harris. So that's about a 2.5 percentage difference. That doesn't seem at all like a landslide.
That certainly doesn't sound as much. 2.5% doesn't sound as much like a landslide.
No. And again, what happens is you're predominantly your safe states tend to rack up big margins on both sides. So New York and California, probably
Democrat.
Maryland, pretty good majorities for Kamala Harris. But when you get to Tennessee, there's going to be a large majority for Donald Trump. Same for Utah, many of these other states. So there's 6 or 7 states that turned out to be very close. Although it didn't last as long as I thought. Basically by about 11 o'clock, I would say Central Time, maybe 10 Eastern Time, it was pretty clear that the trend seemed to be going in Trump's direction, and that was followed through.
I will say on the night of, I expected to be up all night.
I think a lot of us were expecting to be up till Friday night.
Right. And the polls seem to indicate that if it's neck and neck. And here I was thinking truly these swing states are going to be one here, one for this candidate, one for that candidate. And Dr. Vile, I think this is right. Is all of the swing states ended up at Trump?
That's correct. Now, again, if you had in 3 of those states, if you had just 10 or 20,000 here or there, you could have swung it in the other direction. Yeah. And again, had Chelsea just voted a few more times, Georgia might have been one of them.
I know, it's on me, y'all. I'm so sorry.
Really
vote early, vote often, but I missed the ball on that one.
What's really fascinating about this there's a lot of fascinating things, but Harris supporters really thought that she had an advantage in the ground game.
Yeah.
They were touting that, they had knocked on X million numbers of doors, including on election day. Apparently, Trump did something similar to what Obama did, which is he realized that technology, or his people realized that technology had changed. And frankly, I don't know that knocking on doors is particularly effective anymore.
It's social media. It's TikTok.
Right.
He was
exactly the podcast rounds he was doing, I think truly were the right move campaign-wise as far as a marketing strategy. I think it was, again, I think it's interesting in Georgia, the only people that knocked on my door, and there was twice, were from the Trump campaign. Certainly where I'm at, there were a lot more sort of just advertisements that I was seeing, signs for Trump. So I think it's interesting. But I don't know anybody who just answers their door. If I see somebody walking
phone
up,
now.
Or their phone,
if I don't
I think
recognize the number, I don't pick up.
Yeah, and I think it's like one of those things that, yeah, I had voicemails left. See, so my phone, I feel like I got a gazillion and a half million texts from the Harris campaign, phone calls with voicemails, all of those things. And I almost think there's a word for it, and I cannot think of it at the moment. But when someone advertises too much, that people get mad at it, and it like has the reverse effect. I'm really thinking about this. They did a study on this company, Halara, that does like athletic dresses. And they did so many TikTok ads that when you look at their numbers, that's what happened. There's a point where people are so irritated with them that their sales dramatically decreased. And I wonder if that's kind of what happened. I was really annoyed by the amount of contact I got from the Harris campaign personally.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And Chelsea, what you're saying, especially with these podcasts, I mean, Joe Rogan's the biggest podcaster out there. And who is on his show? Donald Trump. There's another group, and I'm terrible for not knowing. I'm not as up to date on things. I'm older than I look. There's another big group. I think they're on social media. Social media, all men. And he got on to their show, and then they did a lot of get out the vote, poured a lot of money into get out the vote. So I think he really did capitalize on especially the younger generation. And I thought Taylor Swift would move the younger generation, but honestly, his use of social media seemed to be a stronger sway than just individual endorsements by the bigger celebrities.
I really think this is obviously, like Monday morning quarterbacking and just speculation, but I also think when it comes to branding, like personal branding, and even for a campaign, that like everyone knows love it, hate it, whatever, what Donald Trump's brand is, what he thinks about things generally, right? Like, and I think the podcasting was genius because he was on these very, very long, we're like 2+ hours of him talking and having conversations. Whereas because of how everything went with the Harris campaign getting a late start sort of in the game, I don't think people knew her brand at all. Well, as a VP, I really don't think the vast majority of people who are not super interested in politics knew anything about her.
So they associated her with Biden.
Aside from her association with Biden, and then a lot of her interviews, in my opinion, seemed very like forced and scripted, and she's a good public speaker, sort of in that way of like a little bit more professional than Trump is, but I don't think it plays well on podcast. Well, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Look,
she's a trained attorney.
Look, I'm not trying to be the enemy within. Okay, we gotta be nicer now. I'm just joking, but I think
time to say that we all voted for Trump several times.
Like, let's do our
little. We've always
SNL.
been for Trump.
Yes, our SNL bit. I'm obviously historically. You can look at everything I've said. Been super supportive.
Absolutely.
But I think that because of that, just sort of how it translates, even in like she did the Call Her Daddy, which is a huge podcast for the young female demographic. Because of sort of her experience as a politician, I think it came off very stiff, not super genuine, personally. And I don't think like that many people felt like they came away from that sort of interview, which should have been more casual, talking like they knew anything about her that they didn't already know by like listening to a stump speech.
So one of here's a big danger for Trump right now. And it was a danger even in the elections where he didn't seem to have a mandate. But, going back to Andrew Jackson, there's a notion that the president, vice president, are the only elected people for the whole country.
Right.
And therefore they speak with special authority. Their word is, better than Congress, which is divided up, which is sort of a switch, by the way, from the framers. But the danger is, and we've had this historically, people who think that they have a majority, the tribune of the people, and they quickly find that the majority was not necessarily for their policies. It was, to the extent that this year's election was primarily, which I think it was, primarily a reaction from against the economic situation, inflation, and the like. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to support all the other president's policies. So 1936, I believe it was 30. Well, I don't know if it was 1936. So Roosevelt had been in office, somewhat frustrated by the Supreme Court. He didn't make that a big issue during his campaign, but as soon as he was elected by a pretty good margin, he said he was going to pack the court. And much to his surprise, the court didn't get packed. Now, it did make a reversal, which made it somewhat less necessary, but in the moment, he overreached. I was trying to go back to 1972, and I'm not sure that I had the timeline. The Watergate break-in had occurred, but I'm not sure to the degree to which Nixon had covered up and sort of, stuck with that. But he also, you would have thought 72 was a true landslide. But 2 years later, he resigned from office. And I just hope that Trump can separate out, the fact that he was elected doesn't necessarily mean that everybody wants tariffs of 20%. It doesn't necessarily mean that we all favor deportation. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody would favor continuing tax cuts and that sort of thing. So there's what we need to look for is what appointments does Trump make? The only appointment he's made so far seems to be a pretty good one. He's chosen a woman as chief. Well, chosen a woman whose name is naturally going to escape me. Susie, help me with the last name, as chief of staff. She's been his campaign coordinator, and she seems to be the one who, no matter what gaffe he made, she kept the campaign in a forward moving positive direction. And so, that's a good sign, but we really need to look closely, who is he going to appoint for attorney general?
Right.
Who's he going to appoint as secretary of state? And, there's a chance that some of the Trump's promises are literally negotiating tactics. You say you're going to double tariffs, trying to get everybody's attention, and then you sit down and you do something that would be, in my judgment, more reasonable on its face. You say you're going to end a war in the first day of office. Good luck with that. Hope you can. Let's end them all around the world and bring in millennium if we can.
Right.
But my guess is,
What, you don't think he can just mandate world peace? Come on.
Well,
that was all our
that
hopes
seems more like something liberals would do, doesn't it?
Hey, look, and I was going to say he's giving such a great Miss America answer. I mean, he was involved he was involved with Miss USA, but Miss America does interviews and onstage questions, which is a little bit different than Miss USA. But I think him saying, "When I become president, I'm going to have world peace," is such a great pageant answer. I really do think so.
Well, and again, he has an advantage, which is he has a majority in the Senate, which is responsible, by the way, for confirmation. It looks he has a majority. Well, currently I think it's 205 to 213 right now, Republicans or Democrats to Republicans, with so Democrats to gain the House would need 13 more seats. Republicans only need 5. And it seems likely that they're going to have, both houses of Congress. He's been able to appoint 3 justices, whereas Biden was only able to appoint 1.
Right.
So he'll be able to get some stuff done. But again, the warning is you go too far, you go too fast, you exceed the mandate, and people sort of take a second look. And, for better or worse, we have in 2 years, every member of the House of Representatives will be back up for election or re-election. Yeah. And we can have relatively quick turnaround, especially in that body.
Right. Now a question on, let's go to the Supreme Court. How many you said he had how many appointments before and during his presidency?
Well, he had 3, and you could argue that he stole 1 or 2 of them.
So there were 3.
That's a partisan interpretation, but if you remember when was it? Okay. There was a vacancy right at the end, within the last year or so, or right before, I think, a year of Obama's term. And
Merrick Garland?
Obama nominated Garland, who later became Attorney General.
Right.
And the Senate refused to move on it. They did then confirm how does it go? Was it Gorsuch? Gorsuch was the first.
I don't remember the orders.
Okay, there were three. In other words, there were two vacancies. There was one vacancy that was left over from the previous administration that was filled. Then he filled a second vacancy. I believe that was Gorsuch. And then the third vacancy came within the last like 6 months. And all the senators who had previously said, no, we need to wait for the next election, now said, let's push through Amy Coney Barrett, which they did successfully. So he ended up with 3 appointments. And the only appointment that Biden got,
Ketanji Jackson.
Right.
Now,
so
the breakdown, Dr. Vial, let me make sure. How many, we know there are 9 Supreme Court justices.
Right.
How
now, that's
many,
not mandated by the Constitution, but there have been 9 for over 100 years now. Yes.
Correct. So the 9 that
Biden could do the funniest thing ever right now. Look, I think we should just let's make it 20 in the last, month of his presidency. Just fill the court personally.
Yeah, but we can't get that through on an amendment and it would be overturned.
Well, no, you could get it. You could do it.
Well, we could, but not that quickly. There's no way it would go that quickly.
Well,
the Republicans would
I'm an optimist. I'm going to use some optimism.
Their feet.
You shouldn't do it because you would simply, if you added 20 to the court,
create chaos.
Republicans would add 30.
Yeah,
exactly.
You'd be in a.
Let's let everybody on the Supreme Court right now.
We're now going to have one per state. Right. So going back to the number 9, how many of those 9 have been appointed by Republican presidents, and how many are left from Democrat presidents?
Okay, let's just look here and see if I have. I think I have the 9 in front of them. Roberts was appointed by Roberts, Thomas, Alito were Republicans, Sotomayor, who's in the news right now, Kagan, Democrats, Gorsuch, Republican, Kavanaugh, Republican, Barrett, Republican, Ketanji Brown Jackson,
so
Democrat.
It's 6-3.
So it's a 6-3.
And we technically, I don't foresee Ketanji Jackson retiring.
No.
Sotomayor's in the news because I've heard rumors they're trying to, like Chelsea's suggesting, they're trying to get her to retire quickly so that Biden could produce one. But I think it's going to be what happened last time with Merrick Garland, is they're going to drag their feet and say, well, this is it's 2 months.
No. Democrats have a majority in the Senate.
Currently, until January.
Mm-hmm. Could they do it? They could do it. Should they do it? No. Is it likely that Sotomayor is going to resign? No. Is it a good precedent? Really not.
No.
And again, this is from one who doesn't believe, I don't think the precedent of not giving a hearing to
Merrick Garland.
Merrick Garland was a good precedent. I don't think it was a particularly good precedent to rush through Amy Coney Barrett, even though I think she's been a pretty good justice.
Mm-hmm. So, with all of this election, we now know that Kamala Harris, as VP, is the one in the head of the Senate who officially, formally certifies the vote in January. Is that correct?
Yeah. Can we throw in one more scenario?
Please.
Which I don't favor, and I don't think is going to happen. But there are some people who say that Biden should resign and turn it over to Harris.
I heard that today.
Which I think would, again, I don't think would be a good thing. You'd have, instead of one transition, you'd have 2. And, let's give a little credit here. And I'm going to give a little blame, too. To my knowledge, well, there have been a couple transitions that have been a little dicey. Franklin Roosevelt and Hoover, apparently, as they traveled to the inauguration, did not talk to each other. When Clinton left office, if I remember, his people took all the W's off the typewriters and off the whatever for Bush coming into office.
Okay,
but to my knowledge, to my knowledge, Trump
What a
is the
petty
only
king. I
person.
kind of love that. That's-
Yeah. Trump is the only person, to my knowledge, who did not meet with the incoming president prior to him and did not. He's the only president who was able, who did not attend the inauguration since Andrew Johnson, who's not someone that you typically want to emulate in these circumstances. Biden has already invited Trump to the White House for a transition. What Biden is trying to do, which is a little dicier and can backfire, is to see to what degree he can ensconce some of his policies. Can he deliver all the aid to Ukraine that's been promised before Trump comes into office? Can he spend down as much of the money for climate change or to prevent climate change prior to coming into office? But if you do too much of that, it does appear, when the people have spoken, whether you agree with them or not, democracies work on popular choice. So we'll see how that goes.
So my son, in looking at this, and maybe this can wind up our topic, my son's 16, and he's still not yet clearly able to vote, but he had two questions that I want to pose here, or at least to present as, especially for young people and those who haven't at least got as much experience as we do with our democratic republic and with voting and with the electoral system. My son's question, and I think part of it is he was genuinely confused by the Electoral College, which a lot of us can be. And sometimes I'm like, wait, now what are we doing with that? I always forget the numbers, but then it pops up on the screen of 270 needed. And it's like, oh yeah, that number. But his question was like, I don't understand. Aren't we a democracy? Why don't we just vote 1-to-1? Why don't we just he didn't understand why we didn't get the popular vote.
Because of the Connecticut Compromise, which is embodied indirectly in the Electoral College. The founders decided that you had representation for people as people, but you also had some representation for states as states. And particularly if you're the smaller state, you're guaranteed at least 3 votes in the Electoral College. So that's the reason.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not a pure democracy.
Exactly. And we were trying to give the examples of, well, would you want California and New York to be the ones deciding the entire country with as many people as they have?
We prefer to have Wisconsin and Michigan do it. But
that's right.
Anyway.
And Georgia, So the other thing is he's been following the news to some extent because I do, but he also asked, and it's just a fact. I'm not trying to pick sides or anything. It's just his other question, I think was a fair question, but how could he get elected? Because he's a felon. Felons can't vote, so how can they be president?
They can in Florida.
And in Florida.
Or some felons can vote in Florida. Right. He's not been convicted of a violent offense.
Right.
And really the only thing, not the only thing, he's basically been convicted of a financial crime.
But still felonies.
They are felonies, but for whatever, right. We tend to worry more about people with hoods and guns roaming the street than we do bankers who cheat you out of your inheritance or whatever they do.
But
not that all bankers do or that he has, but yeah.
Right. And Dr. Val,
it's up to the people.
Right. And you have studied the Constitutional Convention.
Yes.
You've studied that and the framing and how it was all written. So I want to ask you, in your research, has there ever been something you've come across where the framers even discussed whether, was there even a difference between a felony or a misdemeanor? Did they discuss whether presidents who had committed crimes could be, or was it just simply absent from their thoughts as to whether a president could be a felon?
Of course, one difficulty is most felonies are committed at the state and local level. So it would have been hard to come up with a national definition of a crime. I don't know to answer, when all these distinctions came up. I think, have there been people in our past with unsavory backgrounds? I love Mr. Jefferson, but I think the evidence fairly conclusive that he probably had children with a slave. Wasn't a crime at the time,
Right.
but certainly is not something that we would commend as reputable behavior. We had at least one president who had killed a man in a duel, and that was Andrew Jackson. I think the basic, and of course, part of it was the Electoral College hasn't quite worked the way we thought it would. But under the original conception, the notion was that we would be voting for, men of great judgment and wisdom who knew the national characters, and they would sift out. And one example of this, by the way, Henry Clay apparently had a reputation for womanizing and playing the races and all of this kind of thing. He never achieved the presidency, even though he ran 2 or 3 times, ran for the nomination a couple times. But it's up to the people. And, I don't know. I think a lot of people voted for Trump, and I could be wrong because I wasn't one of them. Oh, no, wait. We already said we all voted for Trump. Okay, apart from that statement.
Don't go back on this.
Of course. Put your MAGA hat on, Dr. Vile. Come on.
I think that there are people, I don't think people voted for Trump because he was a felon. Now, I think they voted in spite of that. They voted for other reasons. They're concerned about immigration. They're concerned about the economy. And this sort of thing. So again, we don't want to overread a mandate. Now, the one other element to add, and this is something you would expect Democrats to do rather than Republicans. Democrats are often accused of, well, you're always saying, women and blacks and others, they're disadvantaged because everybody's against them and whatever. And somehow Trump is able to turn the fact that there are 4 or 5 different indictments against him in different places as saying they're all out to get him. Mm-hmm. It's a conspiracy. And you sort of line up, you don't say, well, hey, maybe, he's committed 4 crimes in 4 different places. Shouldn't that concern us? It's like people all over the country are out to get him. So he becomes a victim.
He's done the best, sort of social progress on criminal justice reform that I feel like I've seen in my entire life. Now all of these people are like, wait, maybe not everyone who's indicted is a criminal, which is crazy. I think if I had this conversation with like 2016, some of like what people were saying then and what they are saying now about how the criminal legal process works is a wild shift. I mean, I'm conflicted because I really, I'm sorry. I love him, but insert eye roll here. But I really do think
you're waiting on your call for a cabinet position, right?
Exactly.
Just like
Yes.
Judgeship.
That's what I'm saying. I think I'd be great at it.
I have to answer my phone the next couple of days, even if I don't recognize the call.
Right. Pick it up.
I really do think he's changed the social conversation about like the criminal justice system. And I'm so conflicted about that because how, like,
especially
if somebody's getting railroaded. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like the whole, like, I'm shocked about all of it. And I'm like, if anybody's getting railroaded in our justice system, do we probably think it's Donald Trump?
And a lot of people do, though. It truly is.
They believe it. They really do.
And maybe some of it is. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's not. But maybe some of it is.
Obviously, you're more if you think someone is ideologically perverse or out of the mainstream, you're more likely to want to prosecute them than somebody.
Of course.
You think that it's a lot of the law, right, is mens rea. What's the intention? Mm-hmm. And if you think his intention was to destroy democracy, then you're going to take a very different view than if you think, his purpose was simply to keep in power so he could continue to help the American people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I heard a quote.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please.
No, I heard a quote on another podcast, and I think about it all the time when it comes to this. This was a couple months ago that they were having this conversation, and they said all prosecutions are inherently political. And I think about that once a week now because I think that's a really interesting point when it comes to this. I think a lot of people are like, "Well, he's only being prosecuted because of the political things." And this was the conversation on this other podcast: was that all prosecutions are inherently political.
And I hope that's not true.
I mean,
But I get
think
it.
sort of the example that they gave
Yeah.
was a lot of places that, despite whatever laws are on the books, are not prosecuting,
Right.
marijuana crimes
Marijuana.
anymore.
Right.
That was the example they gave, and I thought that was a really telling example. And I think that's just sort of an interesting piece to the discussion.
Yeah,
And certainly, I'm a former prosecutor, and certainly there is a level of choice for prosecution where ultimately my office has said, if you don't believe in the prosecution of a specific person, if you don't believe you can convict or should convict, then ultimately it's discretion. So,
and a lot of that, though, is practical, right?
correct.
You're convinced somebody is guilty, but if you don't think you can convict them,
I don't have the
why
evidence.
why spend the state money? Why waste the state's money on
And
it?
that was most of my decision making is, having to tell the victims, I believe you, but it's he said, she said, we're never going to win. Do you want to put yourself through this?
Right.
If it's beyond a reasonable doubt and not just more likely than not. So those were most of them. I get very frustrated in my current county where it seems, as a former prosecutor, it's hard because I'm seeing a lot of prosecutions just go away. And I'm like, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, we have full discretion. And in Maryland, especially where I am, the case law is very, very clear of the prosecutor almost without question can dismiss a case for any reason and no reason at all. You're supposed to put a reason on the books, but most of the reason is we don't have sufficient evidence. And
although if you found they did it because they had gotten a bribe, you could probably prosecute them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But can you bring the case back? Depends.
Right.
But it is hard for me as a former prosecutor to be going, okay, we just elected a felon. It's just hard. I am very prosecutorial in my stance. I do believe in justice and mercy, though. I am also a former criminal defense attorney. I still do criminal defense. So there is, like you're saying, Chelsea, in the sense of justice, it's where is that discretion versus the actual enforcement. I know in Virginia, the prosecutors are elected. The prosecutor, the head of the prosecutorial offices in each city and county are elected, and they run on a Republican or Democrat or independent ticket. So there is necessarily politics that's being elected for the prosecutor's office, even if they're nominated or by the state legislature or other judges in Maryland, they run. Well, they run for the people also as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. So we are necessarily inserting some politics into the prosecutor's offices of each jurisdiction. So there is that. But I will tell you, as the former prosecutor, it's hard to step out of a prosecutor's mindset and to step away from, if you break the law, you should be convicted or, put through the justice system. If you're convicted, that means something. Where my initial reaction to my son was, well, you know what? It should be in the Constitution. It should be something that for the president who is, through the Constitution, the one responsible for law and order. There's the lawmakers, the judges, and the law enforcers. And this is
particularly to the degree that you are concerned, as I am now concerned, that the president-elect might use the Justice Department in a partisan fashion.
Right.
Then simply because someone was particularly charged with and even possibly convicted of a felony, if they were done so largely for political reasons, then you wouldn't want to make that a condition of being president for fear that it would be abused.
Fair enough. And maybe that's the answer. So I can get behind that more than anything else I've heard. And I do like that as far as the Constitution and the idea of political fairness and and equal justice. So with that, we're going to end this topic. Stay tuned with us through the next episodes as we continue to break down the legal implications of the presidential election, the upcoming presidency, the politics surrounding it, and how each one does affect it. I'm Virginia Tarani. I've been joined by Chelsea Rogers and Dr. John Vile, and we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.